Fáilte, welcome to the Village Oak Tree. Thank you for joining me again this week. Here we go again. More chaos across the world caused by Trump's United States. This week, I found some more news stories about nearly everything you can imagine, and maybe some you haven't imagined. So gather around, sit you down somewhere comfortable for a bit, while I make an effort to unpack all this to show how this will affect those of us struggling to get by every week. One of the biggest takeaways from these news articles this week is how Trump and his evil minions are isolating the United States and the rest of the world with their obvious mafia attacks. We've been listening to Trump and his cabinet members run around the world over the last year, telling everyone, including allies, that whoever wants to do business with the United States, it'll cost them more to do that from now on. Between the tariffs and outright grifting, most of the world is stepping away rather than giving in. Now, Trump's now infamous global tariffs have alienated many countries, and now they're moving towards China because China is offering stability. One of the largest emerging markets is Africa. And Central Africa is basically giving the U.S. the middle finger while moving their trade to China, Russia, India, and South America. Anywhere but the U.S. China, in an effort to help with all that, has eliminated all the import tariffs for 53 African countries, while Trump is imposing more, along with travel visa restrictions while calling them racist and derogatory names. South America is also making more trade deals with the Europeans now, which isn't winning too many hearts from the EU farmers, but maybe they'll work things out somehow eventually. They're also trading a lot more with China and Russia. As I mentioned last week, certain EU nations are also sliding away from doing business with the U.S., now after the bullying remarks made by the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance last year, and now at the Munich Security Conference, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The EU is also starting to look more towards trading with China, given the instability of the U.S. They're also wondering in private after this last winter whether they shot themselves in the feet when they cut off all that cheap Russian oil in the last couple of years. Buying all that expensive oil and gas in the U.S. has turned out to be an economic disaster for Europe. Most importantly, the U.S. couldn't ship enough of it in a timely manner to keep up with the demand. Not that the EU ran out exactly, but they came close, and that scared them. On top of all of that, the U.S. is hijacking Panamanian-flagged oil tankers carrying Venezuelan oil halfway around the world in the Indian Ocean, claiming they're transporting sanctioned oil. As of last weekend, they have hijacked 2 oil tankers there so far, and they blow up more small boats again around the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, killing 11 people so far since last week, claiming without evidence they're all drug smugglers. Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov is telling Russian News that the U.S. is using its military to take total control over all global energy supply routes. Could he be right? Are we going to start seeing convoys of supply ships and tankers traveling across the known sea lanes with military escorts in the near future in order to protect them from the United States? There are rumors in some of the overseas news that Russia may be considering something like that to help out the Cubans. The Mexican government has successfully delivered humanitarian supplies to the Cubans last week. You have to know they were probably very nervous all the way across the Gulf of Mexico, wondering if the ships were going to be boarded and hijacked by the U.S. military. The Chinese are also making some provocative headlines lately. I have 2 stories about how they told Taiwan, and by proxy the Americans, that if they fire any attack of missiles from those little islands they set up the launchers on, it will mean war, and they'll come out swinging very hard. Taiwan wouldn't stand a chance, and any Western Navy ships that dare to help would be severely damaged or sunk. China is very capable of doing that right now. In addition to all of that, they're mad as hell about the U.S. CIA running a PSYOPs campaign to convince Chinese military members to defect to the U.S. CIA is posting videos urging Chinese military officers to become informants for them, and Beijing is hopping mad. You can bet that China is working on a retaliation for this that they won't make public until they launch it, if they even do that. Trump and the Pentagon do not have the military assets to carry out a war on multiple fronts, such as in the Caribbean, the South China Sea, and in the Middle East, all at the same time. One small silver lining for South America is that the carrier group in the Gulf of Mexico is heading back to port for a small refit before heading for the Arabian Gulf. They're tentatively scheduled to be on station in the Gulf in a couple of weeks or so. With their carrier group leaving for the Arabian Gulf, maybe Cuba will get more relief from its friends. As for the Americans, there are new stories emerging from the Pentagon that if they do attack Iran, they're planning for a prolonged engagement. You think? As I said before, if Trump attacks Iran, there will be a bunch of body bags returning home very quickly after the first wave. There will be planes shot out of the skies over Iran to start with, including F-35s and B-2 bombers. Then, if Trump sends in ground forces, it'll make Iraq look like a bad training mission, and the U.S. will be there for years trying to quell the chaos, just like in Iraq and Afghanistan, maybe even worse. No one really knows if Trump is stupid enough to do all this, so we'll have to see. First of all, I don't see Congress getting on board with this. There will be quite a few MAGA Republicans that will kiss Trump's ass, but not a majority, I think. The protests over dead soldiers coming home will dwarf any of the recent ICE and No Kings protests to date, and even a lot of Republicans know this. So the question becomes, who's in charge? Will Trump muster enough votes in Congress to allow another major war in the Middle East to start up? The even better question is whether Trump will even ask them if he can go to war with Iran. Does Trump think he can just make a phone call and start another regional war that will kill and wound possibly thousands of American military service members? How many ships is Trump willing to sacrifice to go after Iran? Not to mention the bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, just to name a couple. Maybe even Saudi Arabia. If Israel gets involved, they'll be flattened. But they probably think the U.S. will protect them somehow as they're being inundated with Iranian missiles. Trump doesn't have a government in Iran that will roll over for him like the Venezuelans did in January. The IRGC has some of the latest Russian and Chinese anti-aircraft technology that is very capable of shooting down drones and any U.S. aircraft. The U.S.-Chinese radar system can see the stealth fighters as soon as they hit the perimeter. They won't get them all, but I'll bet they'll down a few, maybe more than a few. I heard that Trump has now deployed approximately a third of the U.S. Air Force to the Middle East now, and approximately 40% of the U.S. military from around the world. As for Israel, they're in trouble with the U.S. a little bit. They're bickering about the rebuild Gaza peace plan that Israel doesn't want. It's not just Israel, though. Almost anyone with more than a few brain cells knows that Trump's so-called board of peace is. Israel is calling out for what it is, and since it does not provide what Israel wants. All it does is give Trump control of everything, especially the money, and Israel can't have that. Neither can most of the rest of the known world. No one really cares if the UN fails, but they most certainly don't want to replace it with Trump's board of peace. Better the devil you know kind of thing. I don't know if Trump's grifting scheme to shake down the world will ever get off the ground, but it's a pretty good bet that Trump's going to pull out of the UN soon. He's ready to pull out before during his first term, and it's looking like he may actually go through with it after he takes care of a few other pesky things. You know, things like how to redeploy the ICE paramilitaries with all that chaos that he experienced in Chicago and Minnesota. As so many journalists have asked, it's not a question of if, it's where and when. He's also using DHS, the FTC, and the FCC to go after social media and other online publications that dare to post contents that denigrates ICE and the Trump government. Will publications like Substack and Medium.com fall under that soon? He also got his hands full with trying to subvert the next federal elections in November. As everyone has been watching, he went after the 2020 ballots from Fulton County, Georgia, a couple of weeks ago. If that wasn't shady enough, he's using federal attorneys from Missouri to do his dirty work behind the scenes to work on other nefarious schemes to hijack the election in favor of the Republicans. Missouri, a state where the state government is full of rabid Trump loyalists and who would largely do anything for Trump whenever he asks. I don't know what they hope to gain out of all that, but maybe it all goes back to when the state was violently divided over slavery during the American Civil War. Much like certain southern states, maybe they think Trump will bring back the Confederacy and they can receive some financial gain out of it. Then there are the Epstein files. The dominoes are falling all over Europe as officials in several countries are falling on their swords and resigning over their close associations with the world's most famous pedophile. And now he may have been a possible spy for Israel or Russia or both. He was definitely the world's most famous facilitator for the world's rich and famous during his heyday. He apparently sold secrets like candy at a candy store, along with his trade in underage females and facilitating the world's wealthiest depravities behind closed doors. What they're not talking about very much is how many of these wealthy, sick men were being blackmailed for their peculiar sexual deviancies. There are some stories of alleged rape and torture of young women. For sure, they were, at a minimum, pimped out to all of these wealthiest people around the world, according to some of the recent emails. In other stories, it seems that not everyone in government is getting off scot-free for their prejudices. The French foreign minister is being called out for making public false accusations against the UN Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese. She's famous these days for calling out all the enablers of the Gaza genocide with no favorites left behind. Because of all her reports to the UN and her public support for the Palestinians, along with her colleagues in the ICC, she has been financially sanctioned and bullied on the world stage by multiple Western countries and Israeli supporters. They want her gone. They're not above publicly lying about it to get their way. In the U.S., the grift and corruption is just out in plain sight everywhere. Remember USAID, the program that the U.S. had in place for decades that Trump and his Doge criminal partners did away with? It seems that there was a little bit of money left over in petty cash after they defended it. So the director of OMB, Russell Vought, the guy who largely wrote Project 2025, decided to use a leftover $15 million to fund a personal security detail because he felt threatened. Poor baby. So while children in underdeveloped countries around the world die by the thousands in Africa and other third world countries of starvation and disease, the budget manager is spending that money on himself, as if he doesn't already make a pretty good six-figure salary on the taxpayer's dime. What's worse is the feckless Republican Congress appears to be letting him get away with it. Yeah, the ones who supposedly control how the taxpayers' money gets spent. Imagine what that $15 million could buy for the average American struggling to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. Maybe little things like health care and food, for instance. As sad as that sounds, I'm coming around to thinking that the U.S. should fall down hard. The rest of the world should shun Trump and his government as much as they can get away with without destroying their own economies in the process. China's working hard on that right now. Russia has its hand full, but they're watching to see what happens. They will continue to support China, as China is their best oil customer, among other things. Russia will also offer up a little passive resistance to Trump as they try to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine on their terms. I'm waiting to see how much Russia will support Cuba. That could get interesting if Russia shows up in the Caribbean with oil tankers and a military escort. China is slowly working towards replacing the US dollar with their own currency as the world's reserve currency. They're trading more and more without US dollars around the world these days, so it's only a matter of time. The BRICS bloc is also working hard on an alternate financial payment system to get around the SWIFT payment system and the IMF. Once that comes online, it'll be game over for the U.S.-backed World Monetary Funds and the U.S.-controlled world banking system. The isolation of Trump's United States is slowly taking place right now. You can see it if you look at all the right places. If Trump and his cabinet keep going the way they are, the world will continue to move on largely without them. And the only ones who will suffer the consequences are the average consumers. These are just regular people who only want to live a decent life for the most part by having affordable medical care and housing, decent food in the stores, and fairly priced imports from other countries. They want access to overseas markets, just like the rest of the world, and they're asking themselves why Trump is taking all away from them. Why is the cost of living going up when they voted for him and his promise to lower that? No one voted for a nice paramilitary to terrorize Americans. No one voted for the terrorists that are costing thousands of jobs and the construction of concentration camps across the country. They're seeing these huge data centers go up everywhere and wonder what Trump is going to do about the rising utility costs. They're seeing the wealthiest people get richer while they get poorer. And they're asking, why isn't their leader keeping his promises? Because they're starting to publicly ask why Trump is getting scared and working to make sure that the Republicans win every election going forward, starting with 2026. I, for one, plan on fighting this any way I can with this podcast and my writings. I typically vote as an independent, but I've been voting for the Democrats for a few years now to try and curb the Republicans like George W. Bush and Trump. Not that I think the Democrats are much better, but at least with them, we don't have to worry about losing free and fair elections and Gestapo goon squads roaming the streets asking for citizenship papers. There's a lot of Democrats who I wouldn't mind seeing be replaced either, especially those who run around in expensive suits and cars, taking money from rich donors like AIPAC in order to live their lavish lifestyles while we, the people, struggle to get by from one paycheck to the next. Maybe a few more Democrats were to get their hands dirty, digging dirt on a farm or a construction site somewhere, they might get a few more votes. But no, we get pansies like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, who are only good for talking up a good game and with no substance. Talk is cheap. Actions are worth gold these days. Maybe we should only vote for those who can talk the talk and walk the walk the next time we have an election, instead of only electing the talkers. Politicians like Schumer and Jeffries have never worked a blue-collar job. I wonder when the last time they even put on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and worked up a sweat out in the sun somewhere. Did they ever? Probably not. They have people for that. Same ones who are being taken off the streets and put into MAGA concentration camps or have already been deported. These are the people we elected from around the country to represent us in Congress. See what that got us now? It's time for a major reset and a relatively clean slate. Fire most of them, start over, and hold the new ones more accountable for our well-being. We should elect more politicians from the working class, starting with the next election cycle. Find some folks who have a little dirt under their fingernails, wear slightly rumpled shirts and suits, drive around in older cars, and hang out at local diners now and again. I know of one like that in Maine who's going up against the wealthy established Republican. We need more like that to replace the wealthy oligarch currently running the government. We need to purge the MAGA loyalists from the House and Senate of those who don't want to take care of us, we the people, who thought we elected them to stand for us. As it turns out, we didn't actually elect them. These rich fat cats were elected by the wealthy oligarchs. It's time we change that. It's time we go back to a government of the people, by the people, for the people, instead of the other way around. Maybe it's time for another revolution of sorts to make that change. One made up of millions of protesters and voters who won't be intimidated. That's my speech for the week. Stick around for that after the break as I read another chapter of The Priest by Michael Campy. During this break, I want to take a couple of minutes to explain how you can support this podcast, mainly through my website at coronabeha.com. First, let me say, I don't initially paywall my Substack podcasts and articles for the first 30 days, but I do accept donations of any amount in most currencies using the donation page on my website, which viewers can visit using the QR code at the top left of me here. The website is also listed at the bottom of this video. If you're listening to an audio version of the podcast episode, use the link in the podcast description. And once you get past the intro page, and let me scroll over here and walk you through, you get to the home page, a little information about me, and a Google Translator here at the top of the page. And on the menu bar at the top, there's a blog section. I write articles about anything I'm thinking about at any given time. You can find them here. I try to publish on social media. I do this here because I don't want to have to worry about censorship from the tech companies. There's a photography section, which I have here, which shows pictures from all over the world from my days of traveling everywhere. I've got current photos of all my misadventures from my younger days. Then there's an online store where you can purchase my books, my son's books. There's arrows. You can scroll through the different things that we'll have for sale here. You can get an idea what this looks like. And then there's another pages at the top. This is where you can go and you can see previous podcasts. There's a little bit of bio. And then here's my donations page. Now, if there's any questions, I have set up several methods for visitors to reach out to me directly. You can go here to the contact page. And there's also, if you've got a technical question, you can use this little icon here at the bottom right. There's social media links, you name it. You can find me any way you want. So I hope people watching or listening to the podcast or reading the commentary will take a moment and come visit me at crownofbeha.com. Might even have something you like and you'll want to come back for more. Sláinte. Welcome back. So let me pull up Michael's next chapter here. And we'll go full screen like we typically do here. And let me read this to you. The Priest, formerly known as Bob, Part 62 by Michael Campy. Stuffy looks into the eyes of the devil he knows. We made it to the tree line and huddled in the darkness. There was no talking. We were all too shocked at how easily Dolly, a person we thought was invincible, had been dispatched. We waited for what seemed like a long time and then began moving further into the cover of the trees. We stayed low in case Kurtz was now hunting us. The light was just coming into the eastern sky, and we found a small house on the outskirts of town where we could hide until the next night. It was mid-fall, but the heat was already growing oppressive during the day, and without our supplies and with Kurtz out there somewhere, we couldn't risk traveling in the daylight. Not that night would protect us from the madman with a sniper rifle. The day passed slowly, and none of us got a lot of rest. The priest was on watch, and as it darkened, I went out to see if he was all right to move on. He was faced away from me when I approached, and when he turned, there was a look in his eyes that I had never seen before. It was an almost depthless darkness, and it scared me. "Are you okay?" I asked. He didn't respond right away, just stared at me. He got up and said, "I have killing to do." "We all do," I said. He looked off to the east, grabbed his stick, and went in the house. "Poor," he said. She stirred and then sat up. "What?" "I'll be needing your knife." She covered her weapon with her hands and said, "You got your stick." Staring right at her, he said, "I'll need your knife." The tone in his voice made it clear that he wasn't asking. Everyone was awake as I entered the house. Tiki tugged on my sleeve and beckoned me to lean over. He whispered, "That's the same look he had when he saved me. He'd become someone else. And he'd become someone who can kill. Want all of you to start heading west as soon as it's dark." I said that I thought we should stick together, and he looked right through me and repeated that we should all head west. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'll go back," he said, and then he turned and walked out the door. All right, so that's a kind of a quick chapter here. I appreciate everybody tuning in this week. Gara Mahagat. Thank you for watching and listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed it, and you'll return again to listen to me offer a voice to what a lot of people are thinking these days. To say goodbye this week, I want to offer you up a bit of hope in these dark times. Tyrants come and tyrants go, but what stays with us, despite the darkness, is a resilience that helps us to stand against them until they're gone. Slán go foill.